This is the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast, episode 453.
I program my own computer.
We have a server crash, 404 error, page not found, links aren't working, system is crashing, system is crashing, system is crashing.
Your old HTML website, barely alive. We have the technology. We have WordPress. A new website, better than it was before. Better, stronger, faster. We have the technology. The technology.
Why, hello, everybody. This is Adam Silver, the host of the Kitchen Sink WP Podcast. Thanks for being here. Let's get started. All right, upcoming events. Got 4 of them this week, starting with WordPress Accessibility Day. It's a 24-hour virtual conference, November 2nd and 3rd. It's early this week from when this episode pops out on the Halloween. So, yeah, there's that. Check it out free. And I'll put a link in the show notes, of course. And also, WordCamp Nepal is next weekend, November 5th and 6th. WordCamp Sevilla, also the 5th and 6th. And WordCamp San Jose, the San Jose in this question is Costa Rica, San Jose, also November 5th and 6th. So there's a lot going on next weekend and this week as well. So check that out. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. All right. Moving on from that into segment 1 in the news. Only one thing to talk about here. Openverse, which was previously known as the Creative Commons search, then it joined the WordPress project. It passed a big deal. It passed a big milestone. It now has support for audio files, and it has indexed 800,000 audio files that the team has taken audio support out of beta. So it's no longer in beta. It's available for use, and check it out. Pretty cool. Really neat that you can actually use audio snippets and music that are completely free. So check that out as well. All right. Is that it in the news? Yeah, that's it in the news. Moving on, segment 2, the meat and potatoes of this week's episode. This week I interviewed actually Bet Hannon. Bet is a friend we met at WordCamp US. She is all things accessibility. She's awesome. And take a listen to the interview I had with her, and then we'll come back with the tip and tool of the week. All right, here she is. Today, I am joined by Bet Hannon. Bet is the CEO of Accessicart. She focuses these days on web accessibility, e-commerce, WordPress. She's a wife, mom, grandma, and an aspiring anti-racist, which I'd love to see. With that said, thanks for being on the Kitchen Sink WP podcast, Bet.
It's great to be here.
So for those who listen, and they know me and they might know you, but they don't know how we know each other, I always like to tell the audience how I know the guest. And in this case, I'm pretty sure I know when we met and where we met. It was WordCamp US, after party, 3rd floor, but I don't know what year it was.
The museum, I think it was 2019. I think it was the last year.
I think
the
you're right.
First year in St. Louis.
Yes, that makes sense. Yeah, and you were just hanging out. I was on duty.
We had a great time.
Yeah, I was on duty for safety. Make sure people felt safe in that kind of thing. It was interesting. So, yeah.
Don't slide down the things while you're really drunk.
Right. That too. Because it was a cool museum.
It was a very cool museum.
It was very
a lot of really cool stuff there.
Yeah, it was neat. So with that said, I thank you for being here. On to the questions. So I always start off with, I want to know, how did you get into WordPress? Like, how did you get here?
Yeah. So my first career was nonprofit management. And over the last few years of that, I was doing more operation stuff and then more techie geeky things for them, doing drag and drop websites and doing email newsletters. And it was before social media. But in 2008, right at the beginning of the financial crisis, my position was downsized. And so I kind of stumbled into freelancing because somebody who knew I had been doing email newsletters and some of that stuff said, I want to ask you some questions about constant contact. And so we had coffee and I was answering their questions. And I just kept saying, well, you should do this. And then you should do that. And then they said, wait, I want you to do this for me. And I was like, oh, people will pay you to do this stuff. It was like a little light bulb moment. And so I started out that way. And I didn't have a big coding background. Actually, I started to learn HTML from Constant Contact because you could adjust in the web builder, and started doing more with websites. And then a guy that I still know, that was an iOS app developer, he said, "Oh, you should be doing those websites in WordPress." And I said, I don't even know what you're talking about. And he lived in the Bay Area and I lived in Fresno. And we set up a phone call. This is all before Zoom and all Skype and all these things. Set up a phone call and we both logged into the back end of his WordPress website. And oh my gosh, I could just see the potential of it. And I dived in and, started building stuff out in WordPress, doing more and more self-taught around a lot of the coding stuff. And
Yeah, it's a happy accident, right?
yeah, and then started adding, as the business grew, added people and started growing it as an agency. And so that was from 2008 to now. And
Wow.
so
Yeah. So you said right before we started the call, the recording of this, you mentioned you went through a rebrand recently. So you're now known as Accessicart. What were you before?
yeah, Bet Hannon business websites, and before that, Bet Hannon marketing. But that's not a huge change. But
Yeah.
but yeah, we had been gradually over the last 5-6 years doing more and more with accessibility. We fell into accessibility too.
Mhm.
We have and still have a big client, big agricultural water district in California that's legally part of the state of California.
Okay.
And so they had Section 508 compliance needs. And when their legal team came in and said, hey, you need to make this compliant, we said, well, let us refer you to people who know how to do that. And they were like, well, okay, bring those people in, but we want you all to be able to help us long term with that.
Right.
And so it was a huge investment in our team for them to say that, right? They could have just moved on. But when our team started really diving in and learning about accessibility, getting interested and seeing what making something accessible could do in terms of making an impact, we were just hooked. And so we just learned, and we took additional training and did all kinds of additional work and started working on accessibility pieces. So over the last 6 years, we've been doing, we continue to service existing clients, and we still have a lot of clients that probably don't even know what website accessibility is, but more and more we've been doing with accessibility.
So something stop right there. So for those who don't know, what do you define that as? Like what is
website accessibility?
Right, website specifically
is making your website so that it's usable by anybody.
Okay.
Including people with disabilities.
Right. Visually impaired, audio. Yeah.
Or visually impaired, right? Maybe they'll use a screen reader, which is a tool that reads out loud some things from the website to them. Or there are devices that will help somebody that's mobility impaired. They can't use a mouse. So there are devices that they can use. But even it includes things like making sure you are thinking about people who are colorblind in your color choices, or making sure sometimes that you don't full justify your text, so that that's even on both ends, because that's horrible for people with reading disabilities.
Right.
So things like that. And CDC, a lot of times I think people are really surprised. The CDC says like 25% of all US adults have some disability that needs an accommodation. So it's not a tiny number of people that we're talking about. Right. It's pretty large.
I've noticed for myself lately, like just in the last 3 to 4 years, my eyesight. Yeah, we're not spring chickens,
No, and I learned that that's because it has to do with a yellowing of some of the tissue in your eye. That's a part of what causes that change of color perception. It's really fascinating. Yeah. But yeah, disabilities increase as we age. Your chances of developing a disability increase as you age. All kinds of other, disabilities. You can have an accident and be paralyzed.
Right.
All kinds of things.
So, I was going to say, so that begs the question then, where do you put accessibility in the process of building out a site?
Oh my gosh. Well, a lot of times people will tack it on at the end as a part of QA, which is the most expensive way to do accessibility.
Right.
If you really want to do it as a cost-effective way, you're thinking about it all the way through and all the different parts, right? So from the very beginning of a website project, you're thinking about functionalities and how they're going to either get custom coded or you're going to put some plugins in there and which plugins those are, and is that output going to be accessible? And then you're thinking about it in the choices of color schemes and how you're putting together the mock-ups and all of those font choices and all of those kinds of pieces of design. And then in terms of the coding it out, making sure you're using those best practices. But then even the content people, when you're putting, a lot of people don't think about, it's not just the technical coding parts of the site, and it's not just the design, but the people that are putting the content on the page need to make sure they're putting in the alt text from the images and setting the heading structure properly on the page. And so it's the whole team that really needs to be, the development team that needs to get involved.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that you had that, you still have that client in California regarding the 508. So what's the legal requirements? And I mean, obviously not every, is it just based on who the client is that they have to be legally responsible to take care of it?
A little bit.
Yeah.
Well, if you're government or higher education, because they are often getting a lot of government funds too. If you're government, if at any level, right, from federal all the way down to
local,
divisions of a county or city, right,
Yeah.
Little tiny, you have to have your website accessible. Now, are they all? No, but the bigger ones have taken care of that, and it's kind of working its way down. Sometimes you have to be Section 508. Now that has to do with government.
Right.
Section 508 has to do with government. Sometimes, for instance, if you get federal money in a certain way. So we had a client who had a CDC grant, and part of their CDC grant was that their website had to be Section 508 compliant.
Right.
So sometimes that happens. Otherwise, it's very fuzzy. And this is a part of the reason why we have what are these, we call them surf-by lawsuits. They're kind of predatory. So you'll have one attorney and one plaintiff, typically a blind person, but not always, who are suing hundreds of website owners, right? And they're kind of predatory because often the person really had no intention of using the service, buying a product, any of that. And they're kind of smarmy often and extortionary in a way, right? But there are people who legitimately were there. I mean, that seems to be the only way to get any kind of clarity about what's required, right? So blind guy goes to the Domino's Pizza website. He can't order a pizza. He can't get the website to function to order a pizza. And the law says ADA was Americans with Disabilities Act in the U.S. Was signed in 1990, way before websites were a thing, right? So we're under the section of that law that talks about public accommodations, that if you have a brick and mortar store, you're open for business, you have to make it reasonably usable by people who have disabilities. And so, different courts have come through. Usually they're siding with the plaintiff who's disabled. Not always, but often. And so much so that typically if people get a demand letter, is usually like, we're going to sue you. It's the kind of the pre-lawsuit kind of getting you that letter.
Right.
The people just settle because it's more expensive to, even if you are compliant often. And so we do know that there's probably going to be some legislation, some more guidance coming, but there's a lot of gray areas, and it's not always clear what the requirements are. Typically, it's going to be things where there's higher activity. So if you're a bank,
makes sense.
That's a public utility,
right?
You have to be able to let people get on and pay their bills or do their banking,
right?
Those are no-brainers. That's kind of like absolutely have to be accessible. Next step down, 74% of the lawsuits last year for around website accessibility were e-commerce. Right. And if you think about the high degree of user interaction, right, you have a lot of user inputs and interaction pieces on an e-commerce site, that kind of makes sense. But even below, if you have sites where there's like, it's vital that I have information about a public program or the minutes to the city, minutes to the city council, they have to be. But as you're going down, probably if it's just a brochure site that doesn't do much user activity,
then not the end of the world.
It's not the end of, well, you don't have a high risk probably of getting sued. You could, but the reality is it's not in the target.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things that, you never think about. It reminds me of those people who come after website owners or agencies who used stock photos without permission, that whole thing. Yeah, and those are some of those are legitimate, infringements and some aren't.
Exactly. That's right. And it has that kind of feeling. Some of it is just really like we had a client that got a demand letter
Mm-hmm.
And I got a copy of the demand letter. And fortunately, they did the right thing and paid attention to it and went to their attorney, because you should never ignore those kind of things. They look spammy. They
Right.
look like
Oh,
junk.
yeah.
And it came, and I looked up the attorney. He'd been disbarred 3 times already for
Wow.
other stuff.
Wow.
But, it was like, oh, it would be so easy to just sort of write this guy off. But, it does represent a real risk. And that's a problem. If you delay and it ends up then going to court, the costs just start ticking up super high.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times on photos, because I know I came into WordPress as a photographer years and years ago, if you don't contest the use of something early as the owner, you give precedence to let them have it. I mean, so I had a I had a cease and desist for using the terminology. I used WP 101 for when I was teaching a WordPress class at the adult school. Can't think of his name, who owns it, whatever his name.
Seth.
No, not Seth. That's
yeah.
It's not. Oh no, Sean. Sean Hess. Yeah, Sean.
Sean.
So Sean sent me a cease and desist. Technically, he understood what I was doing. I only used WP 101 at the time because it was on Twitter for the characters. So I changed it to WordPress Essentials, WPE. No big deal. But he said he had to. Had nothing against me teaching a class. But his lawyer's like, hey, you have to. You can't let him use it, because otherwise there's an ownership issue, right? So.
Right. Because then the next people that want to exploit that in a much more kind of
totally fine
predatory way could do it.
I wanted to ask you, move on a little bit to your agency aspect. As you've rebranded, you said you have a team. As CEO, what's your day-to-day look like as an agency owner these days?
Well, I had back-to-back meetings today. So I end up doing, it is interesting. I do less and less of the kind of direct coding, direct website stuff. I'm still in there a little bit, probably because I like doing some of that stuff, some of the WooCommerce stuff and the Gravity Form stuff. But it's more managing the team.
How big is your team?
There are 3 of us that are full-time, and then we have about half a dozen folks around the edges that we pull in as needed. But I'm doing a lot of project management. I'm doing sales and marketing, and I'm doing all the sales stuff, from beginning contacts through contracts and deposits. Then I'm doing marketing strategy, but we have somebody else doing some of the execution on some of the content stuff. And then I'm doing a lot of project management is kind of what I do. And then and I'm still doing all the accounting and billing. I kind of, that's an easy place where if push came to shove, that's probably the next thing to, find a way to outsource or hand off. But, I kind of like it a little bit.
For me, the best investment I made was a PM. That by far, because I was the bottleneck. I'm a good PM, but that's all I'm doing. But I can't PM and biz dev at the same time.
Yeah, it is a lot of hats to wear.
I think it is.
That may be a good place too. I can keep kind of thinking about. Well,
and I'm like you. I still have my hand in some of the sites in general because I built them or they were with me for so long. It's just easier for me to do it than to assign it to my developer to fix as an open ticket.
It would take longer to tell them how to get into the place.
Potentially, yeah.
Yes, sometimes. Yes.
Only on that, in that case, in that scenario, I would say 2 clients left that way, and everyone else, ticket gets opened, it gets assigned. I don't touch it. I don't have to.
We have a couple of sites that are pretty complex builds with WooCommerce memberships and subscriptions and products in stores and And I'm getting to where anytime I need to go in and do something for one of those, and it's only me that can do it right now, I'm launching up my screencast thing. I'm filming myself doing it and talking out loud, and then I'm handing it off to somebody on the team for them to write that all out as a report or checklist. And I'm big on checklists.
Yeah, us too. I mean, I do a checklist for the podcast. I do checklists for everything. I'm trying to work on a docs site, like a wiki, internal use. Here's the process to do everything. And I have the domain. I have the subdomain under concierge for the agency. I have tons of scrap pieces of paper around this office with all the things on it. And, I need to consolidate it. And I'm trying to copy our friend Tara. She has done a very good job. So I'm trying to copy her take on it. So
we're getting pretty good. We're in Basecamp. So we're getting, we have I don't know, we probably have like 30 different project templates for various, like a whole project for just deploying this one thing. So we have clients that are doing like they have highly customized gravity forms for registering for regular events that they're doing
Mm-hmm.
with all these discounts and blah blah blah. But it's there's like a checklist for doing, like, Barb needs a new event. We got to get all
Yeah.
this whole checklist of things, right? So
I think I need to stop being so frugal, and I need to upgrade my level of Asana or something, because to have the templates you have to pay. So it's a balance. It's like, how much do I need this versus I go copy paste a previous project and just strip out the information. So anyway,
yeah, that gets to be a pain.
It does.
It's just nice to like
Click a
just
button.
launch on a template.
Yep.
And,
Oh, I know. I get you. So I have a couple more questions for you.
yes.
So CEO hat, a lot of hats. That is a lot of hats, I think. Yeah. I was asking you, so as a female-owned company, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
what would you advise somebody who's thinking of coming into WordPress right now? Like, where do you see it going? I mean, you and I have both been doing this for a long time.
Yeah.
But we've seen a lot of changes in the landscape, in good, bad, and ugly. But what would you tell somebody if somebody came to you right now and said, "Hey, I want to be a web developer and run an agency"? What advice would you give?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that you need to get connected to the ecosystem. You need to find community.
Mm-hmm.
And your local WordPress meetup, if you're able to do that, get yourself to a WordCamp. It doesn't have to be WordCamp US or
Right.
WordCamp Europe, but get yourself to some WordCamps. Get involved in some of the groups that are having conversations about these sorts of things and what's going on, and that help one another out. So there's like the GoWP agency owners group.
Mm-hmm.
There's the admin bar. There's some other these are on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other ones, but people are really good about answering some questions like, oh, I have this is the having this issue. I don't know what to do with this particular client. Just some of the client side stuff that you don't necessarily. You might be a great developer, but a lot of this is people wrangling,
Right.
and just how do you handle certain things, and just how things are done sometimes, right?
Yeah.
How you take deposits before you start anything, how you just some of those practical pieces of how to run an agency. But getting involved in the community means that you're going to be like listening to and hearing about. You're right, there's been a huge amount of changes, and anymore like in the last few years, it's all the acquisitions. Oh my gosh, keeping track of all the acquisitions and things that plugins that you used to use that are now in this different family, or
Right.
their teams have changed, or like learning those things and staying on top of all of it is huge. So.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there's also the WP drama, which I try to tell people to stay away from.
Well, yes, stay away from the drama, but learning more about more about that wider ecosystem, I think, is really a helpful thing to do. And
I mean, I agree 100%. I mean, I just think what people don't realize is WordPress is so big, there's no way everybody's in the community. There are more companies out there who use WordPress as a platform who will never touch the community, who will never go to a WordCamp. They just won't.
That's right.
It's a tool and a platform.
But more for people that aspire to kind of move into agency life, it's like meeting other people who are doing that same thing, right?
Right.
But within that same community too. So it's when you learn from other people how they're doing things, it gives you ideas for thinking about how you're doing it. And I think sometimes people think about, well, that's the competition. And one of the, I think, important things to learn in the WordPress community, I mean, when I went to one of my very first WordCamps, I was astounded to see, like, there was one plugin that I used, and I knew that was the main developer for that plugin. And then one of their competitors, laughing and having a great time. They were the best of buddies.
Which plugin?
I'll just say it was a backup plugin.
Okay.
So
I know who it is. Okay. Yeah.
But
right.
But that sense that competitors are not cutthroat, but cheering each other on. There's enough business to go around. There are ways that we differentiate each other, ourselves,
right.
But that we can learn and grow from one another, even when we're competing.
Right.
And build one another up. I think and build up the whole ecosystem that way. That's a really different part of the WordPress community and culture. And I think when you learn that, you can go far
Oh yeah.
because you can get, you can start looking at the people that are a couple steps ahead of where you are as your agency is developing and see the kinds of things that they're doing and kind of begin to realize, oh, yeah, I'm the bottleneck. I'm going to have to do this thing. And I see what they're doing and how that got solved for them. Or, look at peers and like, not just things that people are doing well, but things that people are doing, and you say, "Oh, I'm never going to do that."
Right. Right.
Right. And so you clarify kind
Yeah.
of more about what you want to do, what you don't want to do.
It's
So,
true. I mean, it's you have to come from a place of abundance, not scarcity.
exactly.
It's easy to fall into the trap of like, oh my gosh, how come Bet's getting work and I'm not? Well, because Bet's put in 10 years of her life already, if not more. That kind of thing. It just takes time. Build up trust. Get a network going. It just takes time. So.
Well, and then also if you're around enough, you'll learn not everybody's quite as making as much revenue as they
sure.
would like you to think.
Of course, yeah, I know. That's the thing. Also, yeah, there's a lot of smoke and mirrors as well, for sure.
Yep.
So,
Yep. For sure.
all right. On that, I want to be respectful of your time. I want to wrap things up here with your people like to know people's tools. What are the 3 favorite tools that you like to use on a daily basis to run your day-to-day business?
So we already talked about Basecamp, and Basecamp is huge for our team. That's where we do a lot. We do not use Slack. We use a dedicated Campfire in Basecamp to do the same thing as Slack for our team, as well as on individuals work with clients. So we use Basecamp quite heavily. When we get clients out of a project, but that for clients, that's project based. When we get them out of that, we just have a Freshdesk instance that we do all of our ticketing through Freshdesk. Freshdesk tickets, new Freshdesk tickets get a new to-do made in Zapier for our team to be. So then there's, because we discovered often there's some internal questions and things that need to get worked out on a client, on a support ticket, right? So the ticket makes a to-do in Basecamp, and that's where we go back and forth and like, no, remember last time they did this, all of those kinds of snarky things too, occasionally, and the GIFs. But client facing is all over in Freshdesk, and that helps us do it. So Basecamp and Freshdesk, and of course Zapier to connect the two of them. And then I'm using QuickBooks Online, and I'm loving that. I've been in QuickBooks Desktop for a long time, but with the rebrand, we're over in QuickBooks Online, and I am loving how sending out those invoices using their payment gateway, it just all clears. I don't even have to do much bookkeeping. The amount of bookkeeping I'm doing is coming down quite significantly. So this week, I'm loving that. Next week, I might be cursing at them again.
Yeah, we use Freshdesk also. We moved over from Help Scout because the price went up, and for what we need, we actually use the free level of Freshdesk for what I really need. So I saved myself $200, $250 a year, honestly. And I'm actually just upgraded to QuickBooks as well. Not online. I'm still using desktop version, but I'm using QuickIn, not QuickBooks now because I'm sole proprietor. But all my people are 1099, so. Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, I was sole proprietor before, and that was a part of the rebrand was forming an LLC.
Well, I have an LLC, but as a single, that's the difference. Yeah.
But I mean, but putting that all together and I really
makes sense. Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they want to find more about you or accessibility online, working on the ethers?
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at Bet Hannon. Just all one word. And then we have Accessicart has a Twitter account too. So Accessicart, ACCESSICART. And we are at accessicart.com. And we have a blog there with a lot of resources around accessibility, not just technical pieces, but also business related pieces, including things like tax rebates and things. So
awesome. Well, all those links will be in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for being here. Really, it was informational and always good to see you again. So,
Yeah. Hope we'll run into each other in person again.
I'm sure it will happen. All right. Thanks. And like I said, Bet is awesome. Thanks again for being on the show there, Bet. Really do appreciate having you spending some time with me. And you can follow her over at Bet Hannon on Twitter or Accessicart on the web. It's ACCESSICART.com. That's the new website over there. So that's pretty cool. All right, moving on. Segment 3, tip and tool of the week. Actually, we're going to review one. We're going to kind of recap what this episode here. Openverse. Check it out. WordPress.org/Openverse. I played with it a little bit more, dove into some of the music. Really neat. Some of the audio files that are available. So just that's the tip this week is the website WordPress.org .com/Openverse. Check that out and prosper with that. All right. That's it this week. Let me wrap it up. If you have any questions, go ahead, send it in via email, adam@KitchensinkWP.com, or use that speak pipe function of the website. If you want to support the show, you can become a Patreon. I would love that. If you want to sponsor the show, you can do that too. There's a form on the website to fill out, and I'll review it, and hopefully it'll be a match, and you could become a sponsor. So there's that. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. See you next week. Now go out, do some awesome things with WordPress. All right, bye-bye.